Imagine that the deepest pain you've ever faced wasn't a punishment, but a preparation. Imagine that every hurt, loss, and moment of despair wasn't a sign of failure, but the sacred process of your soul's awakening. What if the very darkness you once feared was the crucible that forged your spiritual strength? Today, we're going to explore something profound. There are certain transformations in life that are so radical, so absolute, that when you look back, it's almost impossible to recognize who you were before. And these transformations, the deepest ones, the ones that really shake up the structure of who you are, they don't happen when everything's fine, when you're comfortable and safe. They happen precisely the opposite. They happen when you're broken, when you're at rock bottom, when you've gone through suffering so intense it seemed like you weren't going to survive. It's there, in that dark place where you don't want to be, that something inside you starts to awaken. Something that's been dormant your whole life, waiting for exactly that moment to emerge. I know it's hard to hear this when you're still bleeding, when the wound is still open, and all you can feel is the pain pulsing non-stop. I completely understand when you look at what's left of your life and only see wreckage, when you can't imagine how you're going to rebuild everything that crumbled. But there's a moment, and this moment comes when you least expect it, when you realize that all that suffering wasn't in vain, that it was preparing you for a version of yourself you didn't even know was possible to reach. And that's when the signs start to appear, clear signs that you're no longer who you were, that you've gone through the deepest transformation a soul can go through. When you're in the middle of suffering, when everything around you is falling apart and you can't see a way out, it's almost impossible to believe that it's not a punishment. Because it feels like a punishment. It feels like the entire universe conspired against you. It feels like you did something terribly wrong to deserve so much pain. You turn your entire life upside down looking for the mistake, trying to understand what you did that was so serious to be going through this. And the more you search, the deeper you sink into guilt, into self-criticism, into a deep feeling that you deserve to be suffering. But the truth, and this truth only becomes clear much later, is that deep suffering was never about punishment. It was about preparation. It was about forcing you to look within yourself in a way you never would have looked if everything was fine, if you were comfortable, if life was flowing without friction. Because when you're comfortable, you don't question anything. You don't look inward. You simply live on autopilot, repeating the same patterns, the same lies, the same masks you created to survive in this world. Carl Jung understood this in a way few people can understand. He knew that pain isn't the opposite of evolution. It's an essential part of it. It's the mechanism life uses to break you, to dissolve all the illusions you built about who you are, to force you to face your shadow, that part of you you've always denied, always repressed, always hidden, because you were afraid to accept that it's also you. And it's precisely when everything falls apart, when you lose control, when you see yourself naked before yourself without any defense, without any mask, that the real transformation begins. The losses you suffered, the collapses you experienced, that devastating emptiness that consumed you for so long, all of this was preparing you. Not because you needed to suffer to evolve, but because there are things inside you that can only be born when everything that's false is ripped away, when everything that's superficial dissolves, when you're reduced to your rawest and truest essence. It's there, in that place of complete vulnerability, that the soul has the chance to truly awaken. Jung called this the night journey of the soul. It's that moment when you descend into your own abyss, into the internal chaos you've always avoided looking at, because you were afraid of what you'd find there. It's the phase when all illusions fall, when all the certainties you had about yourself dissolve, when you see yourself face to face with your shadow. And the shadow, in Jung's concept, isn't the evil that needs to be destroyed. It's not the enemy that needs to be defeated. The shadow is everything you've repressed throughout life, everything you denied because it didn't fit the image you built of yourself to please others, to fit in, to be accepted. When you enter this dark night, when you finally find yourself confronted with everything you've always run from, it's terrifying. Because you realize that much of who you thought you were was actually just a construction, a carefully assembled mask you wore your whole life to hide who you really are. You realize you spent years, maybe decades, living a lie, being who others wanted you to be instead of being who you really are. And when this mask falls, when you see yourself naked before yourself without any protection, without any excuse, That's when the real transformation begins. But this journey is brutal. It spares no one. It forces you to face exactly what you fear most in yourself. It drags you to the bottom of your own unconscious and forces you to look at all those ugly, shadowy, painful parts you tried to hide, not only from others, but from yourself. And the scariest part is realizing that all those things you judged in others, all those characteristics you despised, were inside you all along. You were projecting your own shadow onto the world, without even realizing it. It's only when you finally accept that the shadow is also you, that the dark side is also part of your essence, that you're not just light, but also darkness, that integration happens. And when integration happens, when you stop fighting against yourself, and finally embrace all the parts of who you are, without judgment, without shame, without fear, that's when the soul truly awakens. Because awakening isn't about eliminating the darkness, it's about integrating it. It's about recognizing that you are the totality, you are light and shadow at the same time. The first sign that you've really gone through the transformation, that you've crossed that dark night and come out the other side, is the relationship you have with solitude. Before, being alone was terrifying. It was as if solitude was the confirmation of all your deepest fears, proof that you weren't worthy of love, that there was something fundamentally wrong with you, that you were too inadequate for anyone to want to be by your side. You ran from solitude at any cost, filled your life with noise, distraction, people, anything that would keep you from being alone with your own thoughts. Because when you were alone, when silence arrived, all those thoughts you tried to avoid came to the surface. All those emotions you repressed started to pulse, and you didn't know how to deal with it. So you ran. You distracted yourself. You did anything not to feel what you were feeling. Solitude was unbearable because it forced you to face exactly what you feared most, yourself. But after the soul awakens, after you go through the process of confronting your shadow and integrating all the parts of who you are, something changes radically. Solitude stops being a threat and becomes a sanctuary. It stops being that scary place full of ghosts and becomes a sacred space where you can finally hear your own voice. That inner voice that's always been there trying to guide you, but that you could never hear, because you were always running, always fleeing, always distracting yourself with the noise of the world. You realize that solitude isn't empty, it's fertile. It's not abandonment, it's an encounter. An encounter with yourself, with who you really are when you're not trying to impress anyone, when you're not wearing a mask, when you're not performing to be accepted. And in this encounter, in this deep silence, you discover something that changed everything. You discover that you are enough, that you don't need external validation to feel whole, that you don't need anyone's approval to know you're worthy. This doesn't mean you no longer enjoy company. It doesn't mean you've become a hermit who rejects the world. It means you no longer depend on others to feel complete. It means you found within yourself what you once desperately searched for out there. And when you reach this point, when being alone becomes a moment of peace instead of a moment of panic, it's because something deep has transformed in you. The second sign is even deeper, even more revealing that you've changed. It's when you stop blaming. Stop blaming the world, stop blaming people, stop blaming the past for everything that went wrong in your life. Before, you lived in this constant victim narrative. You pointed the finger at everyone except yourself. You put the responsibility for your pain on external things you couldn't control. You blamed the parents who didn't give you what you needed. You blamed the ex who betrayed you. You blamed the boss who didn't value you. You blamed society that didn't give you opportunities. And in this blame, in this constant outrage, you imprisoned yourself even more. Because while you were blaming the world, you were putting yourself in the victim role. You were saying you had no power over your own life, that you were just a plaything in the hands of forces greater than you couldn't control. And this kept you stuck, kept you paralyzed, kept you reliving the same traumas over and over without ever being able to move forward. But when the soul awakens, when you really integrate the suffering and start seeing things from a broader perspective, this narrative changes completely. You stop blaming, not because you think everything was your fault, not because you take responsibility for things that weren't your responsibility, but because you finally understand that staying in blame doesn't get you anywhere. It only keeps you trapped in the past, reliving the same pain infinitely. You realize that the pain you felt, however unfair it was, however devastating it seemed, was teaching you something essential about who you are and about how life works. Each betrayal showed you who really deserves your trust. Each loss taught you about what really matters. Each collapse forced you to rebuild your life in a more authentic way and more aligned with who you really are. And when you stop blaming, when you stop fighting against the past and finally accept that all of that was part of your evolution process, life stops being a war and becomes a school. You understand that nothing was a mistake. Everything was learning. The pain wasn't punishment, it was preparation. The suffering wasn't meaningless. It was the necessary process for you to awaken. And when you reach this point of understanding, when you finally accept that life wasn't against you but preparing you for something greater, everything changes. You stop being a victim and become the protagonist of your own story. If you're enjoying this content, you might also like our exclusive material that's in the first pinned comment. And along with the end of blame, something even more transformative emerges. Something that seems impossible when you're still immersed in pain. Gratitude for the pain lived emerges. I know this seems impossible when you're still hurt. When the pain is still fresh and raw, and all you feel is anger, outrage, despair, a deep sense of injustice that consumes you from within. I know that when you're in the middle of suffering, the last thing you can feel is gratitude. You want the pain to end, you want to go back in time and make different choices. You want to wake up and discover it was all just a nightmare. But there's a moment after the soul awakens when you can look back and see everything you went through with a deep serenity, with an acceptance that doesn't deny the pain but transforms it into wisdom. It's not that you deny the pain. It's not that you pretend it didn't hurt. It's not that you romanticize the suffering as if it had been something beautiful or necessary. You know it hurt. You know it was devastating. You know there were moments when you didn't think you were going to survive. Moments when you asked yourself if it was worth staying alive. Moments when the pain was so intense you couldn't see a future, couldn't imagine a day when you wouldn't be suffering anymore. But now, on the other side of this journey, you realize that pain gave you something nothing else could have given. It gave you depth. It gave you an understanding about human nature that only those who've truly suffered can have. It gave you wisdom about what really matters in life, about what's essential and what's superficial. It gave you an understanding about life, about yourself, about the capacity of the human soul to transform through suffering that you never would have reached if everything had been easy, if you'd never been broken. And when you reach this point, when you can look at your past and feel gratitude, not for the suffering itself, not for the pain you felt, but for what it transformed you into, for what it revealed in you, for the strength you discovered you had, and that you never would have discovered if you hadn't been tested. It's because you've really integrated that experience. The question stops being, why did this happen to me? Why did I have to go through this? Why was life so cruel? And becomes, what did this teach me? How did this transform me? Who did I become by going through this experience? And when this change happens, when you stop seeing yourself as a victim and start seeing yourself as someone who evolved through pain, as someone who was forged in fire and came out stronger, wiser, more compassionate, it's because your consciousness has truly awakened. Another clear sign that you've passed the test is the inner calm that emerges even in the midst of chaos. Before, any instability completely destabilized you. You needed control, you needed certainty, you needed guarantees that everything would be okay. And when things got out of control, when life threw you into unpredictable situations, you panicked, you despaired, you fought frantically to recover the feeling of security. But after you go through deep suffering, after you survive what seemed unbearable, something inside you changes. You realize that control was an illusion. You realize that life has always been uncertain, always been unpredictable, and that trying to control everything only caused you more suffering. And when you finally let go, when you finally accept that you can't control everything, and that it's okay not to know what's going to happen tomorrow, an internal quietness emerges that nothing can shake. This calm doesn't mean you don't care. It doesn't mean you've given up. It means you trust. You trust because you've already been through the worst, already survived what you thought would destroy you, and you're still here. And when you carry within yourself the certainty that you can go through any storm because you've been through one before, external chaos loses the power to destabilize you. You continue feeling, continue living, but you no longer collapse at every challenge that appears. And along with this calm, something even deeper emerges. An expanded compassion emerges. Before, suffering hardened you. You built walls, You closed yourself off. You protected yourself from everything and everyone because you were afraid of suffering again. And the more you suffered, the more you isolated yourself, the more you judged, the more you became cynical and distrustful. But when the soul awakens, when you really integrate the pain and transform it into wisdom, the opposite happens. Instead of hardening, you soften. Pain, instead of closing you, opens you. Because you understand, in a deep and visceral way, that everyone is fighting invisible battles, that everyone carries wounds nobody sees, that everyone is doing the best they can with the tools they have. And when you understand this, when you realize that pain is universal, that everyone suffers, that everyone has shadows, that everyone is trying to survive and evolve in their own way, you stop judging. You stop demanding that people be perfect. You stop getting irritated with others' flaws. You stop creating impossible expectations. And in place of judgment, empathy emerges. In place of rigidity, understanding emerges. And this compassion isn't just for others, it's also for yourself. You stop demanding so much from yourself. Stop criticizing yourself for every mistake. Stop punishing yourself for not being who you think you should be. You accept yourself as human, as someone in process, as someone who's learning and evolving each day. And when you treat yourself with compassion, when you finally give yourself permission to be imperfect, your relationships change completely. Some relationships dissolve naturally, because you realize they were based on masks, on roles you played to be accepted. And now that you no longer need external approval, now that you know who you really are, these relationships simply don't make sense anymore. And you let them go, without resentment, without anger, with gratitude for what they were and with acceptance that the cycle ended. And other relationships deepen because you can finally connect for real, without fear, without defenses, without games. You can be authentic, vulnerable, present. And when you allow yourself to be truly seen, when you allow yourself to connect from your essence and not from your mask, relationships become true, deep, transformative. Another fundamental sign that your soul has awakened is trust in intuition and in the flow of life. Before, you lived in your head. You analyzed everything, planned everything, tried to predict everything. You didn't trust your intuition because you thought it was irrational, that it wasn't reliable, that you needed concrete proof before making any decision. But after you go through the transformation, after you integrate the shadow and awaken consciousness, something changes. You realize that intuition isn't the opposite of reason. It's a different type of intelligence. It's the voice of the soul. It's the wisdom of the unconscious. It's that deep knowledge that goes beyond logic and touches something much more true. And when you start trusting intuition, when you start paying attention to the signs life sends you, when you start noticing the synchronicities that happen around you, you understand that there's a flow, a greater order that you can't control, but that you can learn to follow. You stop fighting against life and start dancing with it. You stop forcing things and start allowing them to unfold in their right time. And when you live this way, when you trust the process and follow your intuition, life starts conspiring in your favor in ways you never could have planned. But perhaps the deepest sign, the most transformative of all, is when you finally stop defining yourself by your wounds. Before, pain was your identity. You were the person who suffered, the person who was betrayed, the person who lost, the person who was abandoned. And you carried these stories as if they were who you are, as if they were the essence of who you'll always be. And the more you clung to these stories, the more you imprisoned yourself in them. Because when you define yourself by pain, when you make your wounds your identity, you can't evolve. You stay stuck in the past, stuck in the victim narrative, stuck in the idea that you're less than you could be because you suffered. But when the soul awakens, when you really integrate the shadow and accept all parts of yourself, you realize that the wounds aren't who you are. They're experiences you lived, they're lessons you learned, they're scars you carry, but they don't define you. You're much bigger than the pain you felt. You're the consciousness that observes, that learns, that evolves, that transforms. And when you reach this point, when you finally free yourself from the victim identity and recognize yourself as someone who went through a deep process of transformation, that's when shadow and light truly integrate. You don't deny what you lived, you don't hide the scars, but you also don't let them define you. You're the sum of everything you went through, but you're also much more than that. This is the moment when the individuation process, as Jung called it, completes itself. You become whole. Not because you got rid of the shadow, but because you integrated it. You become authentic. Not because you became perfect, but because you accepted your imperfection. You become free. Not because the past disappeared, but because it no longer imprisons you. And true healing, deep healing, isn't about erasing the past. It's not about pretending the pain never existed. True healing is about incorporating everything you lived into your own story without shame, without resentment, without weight. It's about looking back and seeing the entire path, with all the falls, all the wounds, all the moments of darkness, and understanding that all of that made sense within a larger narrative of consciousness evolution. You don't erase the pain, you transform it. You don't forget the suffering, you reframe it. And when you can do this, when you can look at your own story and see not just the tragedy but also the transformation, it's because you've truly healed. Not because the pain disappeared, but because it no longer defines you. And along with this healing comes forgiveness. But not moral forgiveness, not the forgiveness you give because you think it's the right thing to do, not the forgiveness you force because someone told you that you need to forgive to move forward. True forgiveness is energetic. It's an internal release that happens when you finally understand that holding on to resentment only keeps you trapped in the past. Forgiveness isn't about the other person deserving it. It's not about forgetting what happened. It's not about accepting the unacceptable. Forgiveness is about you. It's about freeing your own soul from the weight of carrying anger, hatred, hurt. It's about choosing your peace instead of continuing to feed the pain. And when you forgive, when you really let go, it's not because you're better than anyone. It's not because you're enlightened or saintly. It's because you understood that holding on to resentment is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. It's because you got tired of carrying this weight. It's because you want to live truly, and you know you can't live fully while the past still imprisons you. And when you finally forgive, when you finally let go, something magical happens. A silent joy emerges, a joy that doesn't depend on external circumstances, a joy that doesn't need a reason to exist. It's not euphoria. It's not that superficial happiness that disappears at the first problem. It's a deep feeling of being alive, of being present, of being connected with existence itself. It's the joy of someone who knows they've already been through the worst and survived. It's the joy of someone who no longer needs to prove anything to anyone. It's the joy of someone who finally accepted themselves, with light and shadow, with strengths and weaknesses, with everything that's human. It's the joy of someone who understood that life doesn't need to be perfect to be beautiful, that existence doesn't need to be easy to be worthwhile. And when you carry this joy within yourself, when you live from this place of internal fullness, the present becomes sacred. You stop living in the past, reliving traumas and resentments. You stop living in the future, anxious and worried about what hasn't happened yet. You can finally live now, in this moment, with all your attention, with all your presence, with all your reverence. Simple things become extraordinary. A cup of coffee in the morning, the sound of rain, the silence of night, a true conversation with someone you love. All of this takes on a deep meaning, because you're finally present enough to notice the beauty that's always been there, but that you could never see because you were always running, always fleeing, always seeking something outside yourself. And this awakening, this capacity to live in the present with reverence, doesn't make you passive, doesn't make you conformist. It makes you conscious. You continue acting, continue creating, continue seeking to evolve, but not from fear, not from lack, not from the feeling that you need to be someone different to be worthy. You act from fullness, from acceptance, from the consciousness that you're already whole, and that life is a dance, not a battle. And along with this consciousness comes a deep humility, because the awakening of the soul doesn't make you superior. It doesn't transform you into someone better than others. It transforms you into someone who understands that each person is in their own process, at their own pace, on their own journey of evolution. You stop judging those who haven't awakened yet. You stop thinking you have all the answers. You stop wanting to convince others that you're right. You simply live from your truth, respect the truth of others, and understand that each soul has its time, that each person will awaken when they're ready, and that you can't force anyone to evolve before their time. This humility makes you more human, more accessible, more present. You stop living in the spiritual arrogance of thinking that because you've awakened, You're better than those who haven't awakened yet. You understand that awakening isn't an end, it's a beginning. It's the start of an even greater journey of consciousness, of compassion, of service. And that's when the alignment happens between your interior and your exterior. You stop living in contradiction. You stop saying one thing and doing another. You stop using masks to please, to fit in, to be accepted. You live from your internal truth, and your actions reflect who you really are. The decisions you make stop coming from fear, stop coming from the need for approval, stop coming from external pressure. They come from alignment. They come from the internal certainty that what you're doing is right for you, even if nobody understands, even if nobody approves. And when you live this way, when you act from integrity, life becomes coherent, clear, true. You stop feeling divided. You stop feeling lost. You stop questioning yourself all the time if you're doing the right thing. You simply know. And this knowing doesn't come from the head, doesn't come from analysis, doesn't come from external approval. It comes from the soul. It comes from the center. It comes from that deep place inside you that always knew who you are, but that you took so long to finally hear. And when you reach this place of alignment, when you finally live from your truth, something greater starts to happen. Your transformation stops being just about you and starts benefiting the world around you. Not because you're trying to save anyone, not because you're preaching or teaching, but simply because your presence has changed. People feel it. They feel your authenticity. They feel your peace. They feel your integrity. And just by being near you, just by seeing how you live, how you respond to challenges, how you relate to life, they start to awaken too. You become a mirror for other people, reflecting the possibility that it's possible to live differently, that it's possible to go through pain and come out transformed, that it's possible to awaken. And that's when the cycle completes itself. The pain you felt, the suffering you went through, the transformation you lived, all of this stops being just your story and becomes a light for others. You don't need to tell your story to everyone. You don't need to convince anyone of anything. Your life speaks for itself. The way you live, the way you love, the way you're present, all of this becomes a silent form of collective healing. And when you realize this, when you understand that your personal transformation has an impact on the world around you, you understand why you went through everything you went through. You understand that the pain wasn't in vain, that the suffering wasn't meaningless, that the dark night had a greater purpose you couldn't see at the time. You understand that the soul needs to be broken to awaken, that consciousness needs to go through fire to purify itself, that evolution requires sacrifice, renunciation, transformation. And when you finally accept this, when you finally see the complete picture, that's when the deepest gratitude you've ever felt emerges. It's not gratitude for the good things. It's not gratitude for what was easy. It's gratitude for what was difficult, for what broke you, for what transformed you. It's gratitude for the pain that awakened you, for the loss that taught you, for the emptiness that forced you to find yourself. It's gratitude for the entire journey, with everything it had of beautiful and brutal. And when you live from this gratitude, when you look at your life and see not just the suffering, but also the meaning, not just the pain, but also the transformation, you understand that you've passed the test. You understand that your soul has awakened. You understand that you're no longer who you were before, and that this is the greatest blessing you could have received. So if you recognize these signs in yourself, if you notice that something has changed deeply within you, if you look back and see not just the pain but also the evolution, it's because you've gone through the most difficult process a soul can go through, and you came out the other side, transformed, whole, awakened. And if you're just beginning this journey, if you're still in the middle of the darkness not knowing if you're going to make it out, I want you to know that you will. You're going to get through this. You're going to survive. And you're going to awaken. Because the pain didn't come to destroy you, it came to transform you. And when you finally understand this, when you finally cross the dark night and see the light on the other side, you're going to realize it was worth it. Every tear, every fall, every moment of despair, everything was part of the process of making you who you were always meant to be.